I'd like to cover some concepts in the realm of responsive web design. This might be our last slide-based lecture of the semester. And these slides, these excellent slides, came from this person whose handle is at Sanyei, and she did an amazing job summarizing these concepts. So responsive web design is making your site work for all device sizes. So your design responds to the width or other characteristics of the device that the user is using, that the user has. I don't know if you remember, you're probably too young, but when the iPhones just came out, the whole internet was made for websites that were desktop websites. And in order to make that work on a mobile phone, you had to like zoom in. You had to pinch to zoom into the sites. So it was magical at the time because it meant you could actually browse the web in a meaningful way on a mobile device. But since then, thankfully, web designers have understood we have to make the viewing experience great for everybody, regardless of the device, because probably now like more than half of the website usage is from a mobile device. And so you're just used to this. You grew up in this environment where the site actually always looks good regardless of what device you're on. And we're going to learn in this slide set 3 tools, 3 like coding design techniques to make your sites work responsively. Are you anticipating? Do you have the anticipation? Boom. Number 1, and kind of most important, is having a fluid layout. So these are in order, meaning you should always do this. And then if you have to, do the next one. And if you have to, do the third one. A fluid layout basically means make your site, make the widths of the elements on your site in percentages. To me is the long and short of it. Back in the day, this is back in '08, which was the day, everybody would have made all of their widths in pixels. So you would have had like a 600 pixel main area and a 300 pixel sidebar area. You with me? That means you needed 900 pixels. And if you were ever on a device like this that didn't have 900 pixels of width, then you'd have to zoom out so you could see the whole width. And then zoom in to read the text. Are you with me? So really, one of the main things we want to do, which I think I've always modeled in the code in this class, is to use percentage-based widths of things. Number 2 are media queries, which I introduced last time. The media query is the next level of responsiveness, which means we're going to write a little extra code, this at media, and then we're going to rewrite CSS so that at particular screen widths, we'll override the CSS to be different. And the most common thing that we do here, just to like cut to the chase on this one as well, is make multi-column things stack up vertically so that they become multiple row things. Does that make sense? And you've seen this pattern. If you take a site, a desktop site, and squeeze down your screen, basically this stuff begins to stack up. And you have a single column layout with things stacking on top of each other. And one way to do this is with media queries. And number 3 are what she calls flexible media. And by that, we mean images, videos, and maybe even fonts become sort of stretchy, which is again sort of they're going to be defined in relative units like percentages or ems, and actually be able to scale in the size so that they fill up the width. And we're almost never going to make images that are 300 pixels wide. We don't want that. So more on that in just a bit. So let's talk about fluid layout. This is the old style way of making a site. We would have this container that's 1280 pixels wide, and within that we might have a 960 pixel H1 top banner kind of thing. We might have a 600 pixel main area and a 300 pixel sidebar, and it looks like the footer is also the 960, and this up here is 960. So we don't do that anymore. We're always going to think in percentages. So, sorry, went back too far. We're not doing this. Instead, if we want something like that, and which you might not even think about this, but if you had laid it out like this, we're just going to do a little division. Do you like division? No. We're saying what percent width is something. Take the width that you want it to be in pixels, if you think in pixels, divided by the width of the thing that it's in, its parent. And that percent will be the percent that it should be wide. So in this example, this 960 is inside something that's 1280. So 960 divided by 1280 is a percent, and that's what we want to use. So we're going to make this 75%. And now if somebody's screen is a little bit smaller than 1280, if it's 1100, we'll still basically have the same layout. It'll just be squeezed in. It'll still be 75% of the outer width. Does that make sense? And it's the same for these inner things. Certainly this thing was 100%. That was clear to see that it was full width. This 600, we're going to divide the 600 not by the 1280, but by the thing that it's in, which is the 960, to get 62.5%. So we'll get the same layout. Same with the 300, 31.25%. And it really is okay to put those specific percentages in down to the several decimal points if you really want to kind of control it like this. Keep in mind, and I've mentioned this before, it is essential, unless you want to commit crimes against humanity, which I say in jest, that you make sure you never exceed 100%. Because if you exceed 100% width, what's going to happen? Horizontal scrolling. I kind of feel like a DJ. Horizontal scrolling. We never want horizontal scrolling. That's almost always bad UX, unless it's a carousel that actually is supposed to scroll. But maybe you shouldn't be using that carousel anyway. Likewise, you can see the footer is 100% as well. So we're not going to define the widths of these big blocks of content in pixels. We're going to always want to use percentages. Flex will also help with this by making things kind of the default size to fit on one row. So in that sense, Flex kind of lets you cheat. But with Flex, if you just use Flex without any more styling, things will be as wide as they need to be. But what if you don't want them to be that default? What if you actually want this left side thing to be about 2/3 and this to be about 1/3 and there to be this extra space in the middle? Then you're going to want to set widths. Here's a really cool animation that I found to drive this point home, which maybe I should have started with. So this is if we set things in relative units on the left, and this is if we set things in static units. So pixels over here, percent here. Everybody watching? I'm going to click play, and there's going to be an animation. Wasn't that fun? So you see how by putting things in percents, this site still looks okay, and this site looks like garbage. Because it'll create horizontal scrolling if we're on a small device. Yeah? So you want to always use percentages on the widths of the main things. Like if you were going to have like even this little star here, that would be okay to say, hey, I really want this to be 50 pixels wide and 50 pixels tall. I probably would just do width though. Pixels are okay on that when like that's a kind of an element of content. But the container that it's in, even this container, I would hesitate to put a width on it. in pixels. Okay, so this is fluid layout. Always percents on the main kind of layout elements of your page. Yes? Questions on this? So this is the number one thing. If you do this, you're like 80% to a responsive site. And if you must, you can do the extra things that come after this. If you don't do this, then the other things kind of, to me, like won't work very well because you've missed the essential first step. Okay, so number 2 are media queries, and media queries are based on this idea of breakpoints. And the idea, hang on, let me let these animations come in, is that, hang on, we have different devices. I apologize. This is what Apple devices used to look like 8 to 10 years ago. You see these horrendous bezels around the outside. They're so thick. You see that, the thick bezels on the iPad? It's nasty. I would be embarrassed to have devices like this. There's this girl in the Human and AI class who has a MacBook Air with giant bezels. Apparently the computer works fine, but I kind of ruthlessly make fun of her because it's such an old MacBook Air. Anyway, that's my confession moment. It's really a fine computer, and it gets the job done for her as an English major. Okay, so the idea is, if we know that we have different classes of devices, kind of, which we would say, hey, we have like we have a big screen devices that are like laptops or desktops. We've got devices like the tablets where we know what the width is when the device is in landscape, and we know what the width is when it's in portrait. Likewise, we know what mobile phones' widths are in landscape and portrait. Then if we want to, with like this seems a little excessive to me. I wouldn't make 4 layouts. I would make 3 at the most. But we could decide, all right, we want to have a specific site if you have more than 1,200 pixels. If you have more than 1,200 pixels on your screen, whether that's a giant widescreen monitor or just a decently sized, like 13 or more inch laptop, that's a breakpoint, and we're going to make a version of the site for you. But the version of the site, it's still the same HTML, just some slightly tweaked CSS. Maybe if you are right at 1024, which is classic iPad in landscape size, we're kind of going to make an iPad version of the site. Maybe this is the one that I would not actually do. Make a different version of the site for iPad tablets that are 768, and then make another one that's kind of less than 768 or less than 600. Basically, any mobile phone would be less than 600. And the syntax for this is here on this media query slide. We saw this last time. This is the old style syntax, which still works. I think the new style syntax is a lot more readable. You see here, you can say at media screen, which means you're seeing it on a screen. Honestly, I don't think screen is that useful because that's pretty much always how people are using your site. They're not printing it out. The important part is the second part where you're saying if the device is no more, is more than 1,200 pixels, if it has a max width of 1,200, then this is going to be our desktop settings. If it has a max width of 1024, this is our iPad landscape. A max width of 768, it's portrait. Max width of 600 pixels, it's iPhone. This is why last time, the new syntax, did you see me draw it last time? You can actually just do it like math and say width is less than 768 pixels. And I think if you just have one thing, you don't even need the parentheses, but I'm not sure. So this is the syntax, which says, this is omitting kind of the most important part, perhaps you could say, which is what happens in these curlies here is the code that is applied, the CSS styles that are applied on this size device. So generally we put in our baseline styles, which you can decide which way you want to go. You could put in your styles for the big site, and then in your media query say, this is what it looks like on a smaller size device. Or you could invert that and say, this is how it looks on small devices. And if you happen to have more than 1,000 pixels, then do this other layout instead, which might be changing flex direction from column to row or row to column would be a really common thing to do. You also want to have this meta tag that's viewport in the top of your file in order to make this work correctly. And fortunately, this has always been included in that placeholder content that VS Code writes when you say bang tab. So you were always writing this line even if you didn't know what it was for. But it kind of, in my mind, says don't zoom out. Just be 100% of the device's width. Okay, so again, now I probably should have started with this. After hearing all that junk, here's the animation of what we're talking about. So you see we've got red, green, and then 4 dots, white dots, and then blue dots. So without breakpoints, with just a flexible layout, everything just gets squished in, which might be okay. But for some layouts, having 2 columns on a mobile phone is really too tight. It's just too narrow to have 2 separate things, especially if you've got like a 1/3, 2/3 split. That 1/3 column is like that wide. That's not very readable. You can't fit almost any words across. It's gross. So what would you do more commonly is have a breakpoint and actually change the layout of the page. In this case, you see these 2 things aren't just stacking, but it's actually changing the order. Do you see the white dots? The way I see it, if this is left or right, top down, the white dots end up going right after the red thing, and the green thing goes all the way under the white dots, and then presumably the blue dots are underneath the green. Does that make sense? Like you've seen this on real websites. We've seen it on Goodreads and any site you've looked at where when you shrink the site down, some stuff goes into different places. And media queries are the way to do that. They're our tool. Okay, so we've got 2 things so far. Flexible layouts, which is using percentage-based widths. And we're always going to do that. So that our sites don't look like garbage on phones. Number 2, media queries allow us to actually do something different, change the CSS on different size devices. And number 3, so this is the icing on top. On one level, this first bit, you should always do this. And you've seen me do this. Images, just look at images for now. Images, IMG, should always have a max width of 100%. Images have an intrinsic size that is like pixelated, rasterized images, JPGs, PNGs, GIFs, GIFs. Meaning when you save that file, when you take the picture, you get it off online in a legal way, that picture may be 1,000 pixels wide, maybe 4,000 pixels wide if it's a photograph. It actually is 4,000 pixels wide. Like it knows how wide it is. And when you put that image, you've got, let's say, this is your phone. I guess it's rounded corners then. Yeah. This is an Apple phone, so it's going to have this weird island thing up here. You with me? Just going to have this like bar in the bottom. If you create a div, this is a div, and there's an image in this div, by default, even if the div is 100% width, so the div is here, yeah? If I'm on a mobile device might be like 300, 400 pixels wide. I think an modern Apple. Let's call it like 390 pixels is how wide this actually is, okay? If you put in an image that's 1,000 pixels, you've seen this. It'll do this. This is the, and it'll look really gross, yeah? because this image really does have 1,000 pixels of information. So you never want this to happen. So it's really okay to, at the beginning of your CSS, say for all images, they have a maximum width of 100%. So that means they will always stay within their parent. You should control the width of the image by controlling the width of its parent, is what you should do. Now notice what this does. This is max width, not width. If you had an image that was 200 pixels wide, 200 is less than this 390. So since it's max width, it won't get bigger than its default size. Its intrinsic size. If you said width 100%, instead of max width, then it would stretch the 200 to the 390, and it would be pixelated and grown. So using this max width is something you always want to do. Right? There's going to be more to this flexible media thing. This one, I guess, is just as important to me as percentage-based widths, but it is a percentage-based width. But it's max width. There are a couple other things that fall in this same category. Things that you embed, things that are objects, which we haven't really talked about very much, but if you were going to like embed a Google map or some other thing, it would be this. There is a video element if you're going to host a video on your site, and you would want that to be this max width as well. So even if the video is this wide, keep it within its container. Does this make sense with flexible media? So when you've got this media, you always want it constrained to its parent. So max width of 100% there. Okay, let me talk about two more special things. Maybe a little bit more than that. Another thing, another piece of media that you can control and make it flexible are font sizes. And actually, this is, I don't like this. Let me do this the modern way. So you might call this responsive text. A couple things that we can do here. Right. At the simplest case, you could see this. We could just say, we could use a media query, and in addition to doing those layout changes, in the media query, we could say, hey, if you've got a small size, if you've got a big size screen, make the font bigger. You see this font is going to be 80 pixels if your screen is greater than 601 pixels. If you're less than 600 pixels, then do the font size of 30. Does that make sense? So it switches from a small font size to a big font size when the screen gets wider. So if you want to go to this level, this is a fine thing to do when you realize, like when you do have a giant screen, especially for like some of your big header text, it's okay to have some big text. But usually like a font size 80, that's going to take up so much width that you don't want your words to be that big when you're on a small size screen, so you have to change the font size. Another thing that you can do, that was a weird ad. Don't just use this. There are two units that I haven't mentioned before called VW and VH. And VW is a unit that means view width. So if you have something that is 10 VW, then this is essentially saying this is 10% of the width of the current width of the screen. Does that make sense? So if in this example, if this device were 390 pixels wide, then 10 VW would be 39 pixels. If you were on a screen that was 1280, then 10 VW would be 128. Does that make sense? So you really are, when you use VW, saying you're able to get a percentage of the screen. So if you make your screen bigger, then the font will grow incrementally. Instead of switching from a small size to a big size, the VW would kind of change dynamically. The problem with this is you generally want to have the smallest possible size that you're going to go down to and the largest possible size you're going to go up to. Does that make sense? If somebody has a really wide screen, like 3,000 pixels wide, you don't want your font size to just keep getting bigger and bigger. And for that reason, let me see if I can find an example. CSS variable font size. There's this. Let me see if I can't. Yeah. Maybe this is a little gross. You can use this for more than just font sizes. Let me see if I can find the font size. Here we go. For many font sizes, but we would like rims. This is a little complicated, but this clamp function essentially says clamp takes 3 values. The smallest value you can ever be, the largest value you can ever be, and then a formula for in between. And you see this formula, which is, this is the smallest. So this is saying this header font will, at the very smallest, be 1 rem. At the very largest, it'll be 3.5 rems. Otherwise, it'll be negative 0.875 rems plus 8.333 VWs, which was a very weird sentence to say. But you see, the VW is the dynamic size. So this is 8.3% of the current view width. But then they subtract 0.875 rem, which is in a different unit, but it can handle this. How do you find numbers like this? Trial and error. Okay, let me see if I can't. They've got this nice code pin here. Code pin is a way to get live examples. You see, as I'm making this viewport smaller, you see I've just hit the minimum, the font size of 1 rem. When I'm at this width, you see it's changing the font size to be that 1.58 rem. It's getting bigger and bigger. If I can make this wide enough, I'll hit the 3.5 rem max, which is 56 pixels, and then it never gets bigger, even though I get wider. Does that make sense? So to me, this is like the most advanced way of doing flexible font sizes is to use this clamp function, which honestly to me makes a lot of sense. Instead of you having to choose, but when do I want to make it from the small size to the big size? And what is the small size? And what is the big size? Because whenever you do that, it's like the small size is really, really small right under your breakpoint. And then all of a sudden, the big size is like really, really big right at the breakpoint. But once it's a lot big, once your breakpoint is bigger, once you're past the breakpoint, then it's like, oh, that size is okay. Does that make sense? And this smooths it out. I mean, you can see this. I don't know. Does this function help you? I like this. You see this function? So it's like stuck. It has this minimum. It goes in this linearly increasing width, and then it's stuck at 3.5. Does that make sense? So it's kind of following this smooth function. The other way, the breakpoint way is no smoothness. You just jump up to the other size. Okay, so these are called like variable font sizes, and I feel like they're not the. This isn't rocket science, even though it is a formula. It's a neat way to adapt your font sizes to the screen. You can do this with other things as well, like they showed up here. If you really did want to change the width of a particular div, looks like it's some banner div, like this image. But you wanted to say here's the min width and the max width. You could do that with min width and max width. But you couldn't do this math without this. You see the math? It's not just 50%. It's 50% plus 20 pixels. So the way that you're combining two different units requires jumping through some extra hoops. Okay. Another way that we can make our media flexible is by using vectors like SVG instead of old-style, traditional pixel-based images, which we've seen already in this class, where if we have the SVG of our logo, then we can scale that and it'll never pixelate. So in this example, you see they've got the vector defines the circle, whereas if it's an image of a circle, once you blow that up past its intrinsic size, it's going to pixelate because it doesn't have that information. The information that a pixel-based image has is the pixels. And once you make it bigger than it should be, then you can see the pixels with your eye. So this is why we would prefer vectors if it's something that's suitable for vectorizing. If you have a photograph, you know, like a photograph. I'm pretending to take a picture with a camera. A camera is like a phone that can't make phone calls or have apps. You can just take pictures with it. I don't know if you've seen these devices. Camera joke was not funny. Okay, I hear you. You guys know what cameras are, yes? You have to like have a stance, right? You guys, photography majors out there? Any photography majors? Dylan knows. Dylan? Sorry, Logan, you got it? Okay. Garrett, photography? No? Okay. Grace, you were almost a photography major. Yeah? See, she's on the, we need to take some pictures in this class. We need to get the social media presence for CIS211 is very weak, very weak. One other thing that you can do that I haven't emphasized or introduced in this class is, did you ever notice that you can increase the font size of a font and it always looks good? It doesn't pixelate? Why is that? The reason is because fonts are vector-based definitions of shapes. They're just shapes of letters. You with me? So they're the original vector format. Like a decade ago, people figured out, wait, what if we made shapes that weren't just letters? Like what if we made a font that was just a bunch of icons, like the Facebook icon and the Instagram icon? It's just a shape, so it's basically a letter. You with me? So if you, there's a lot of icon fonts out there, and it's very useful. It was especially useful in the pre-SVG days of saying, hey, if I just use this font, then I can get all of these special symbols. I can resize them to my heart's content because you can resize a font with font size, and I can recolor them because they're just fonts. I can recolor them with just color. Does that make sense? So an icon font is a really useful way to get vector-based shapes. Ethan Marcotte was the guy that originated the term and kind of invented responsive web design. So he's kind of a big dog. And here's some other blog posts that she used to create this resource here. So again, kudos to Sanyai, and that's like her first and last name, I think, but for a good set of slides. Okay, so let's code something. You guys ready to code hard? Yeah, the silence. All right, so I'm going to create a new window. I'm going to open up a new folder like I normally do to start this. I'm going to put it in the place where I put stuff. I'm just going to call this RWD, standing for Responsive Web Design. Let's see. And I'm going to create a new file called index.html and put in the placeholder. Is that legible? And I'm going to create a new file called styles.css, and I'm going to put my standard margin 0, padding 0, box sizing, border box. This is my standard reset. And I'm going to connect here. I'm going to link to the CSS to styles. And I would like to create a div called red, a div with a class of red, and a div with a class of blue. And I think I also want to give these divs a class of box. So can y'all read this? Do you want it in light mode? Would light mode make it more legible? It is more legible, but it hurts me. All right, back to my CSS. I'm going to say the boxes. I want to make these guys look like boxes. So they're going to have a width of, let's say 40%. And I'm going to give it a min height of, I don't know, 100 pixels. And then let me go live so I can see what I'm doing, make sure I'm not doing something super ridiculous. It looks amazing. Wow. Hang on. Does this have to be height? Oh. They're there, they're just invisible. So let me here say dot red needs to have a background color of some sort of red color that speaks to you. Crimson. Okay. And dot green needs to have a background color of some kind of greenish color that speaks to you. Dark slate gray. I guess that's not really. Oh, this needs to be. Oh, that is dot green. Oh, it wasn't green. It was blue, wasn't it? Dodger blue. It's a exclamation point. And maybe I'm going to put a H1 that says red and an H1 that says blue. And I actually think I want a green one. It says green. And for this, green, background color, dark sea green. Yeah, you can't trust those colors. And I think I want to have a div that's a wrapper that wraps all three of those. You seeing this? So now I have wrapped the red box, the blue box, and the green box in this wrapper. Yeah? And actually, I think I don't want them to have a width. I'm going to take the width off. So by default, they'll be 100% width because that's the way HTML CSS works. I've specified that they must be 100 pixels tall. And actually, I'm going to change this to min height. To me, that's another thing about responsive. design and web design in general, if you want to try to avoid setting height and width, and generally prefer min height, max width, max width. So basically here I'm saying, I need you to be at least 100 pixels tall. If I happen to get a bunch of content so that you need to be more than 100 pixels tall, then you could be taller. If I'd set height to be 100 and added more content later, then it would scroll or just chop off the extra content. That's no good. Also, this bothers me. Can I have text? I really want a text align center. And forgive me, I can't handle this. I want to have a font family that is the system UI so that it doesn't look so terrible. And for these, at least that black on red is gross. I'm kind of thinking for each of these boxes, I want a font color, which is called color, right, of white. Okay. Okay. If I wanted to put all those three things in a row, I could say dot wrapper and display flex, right? Because display flex by default is going to put them in a row. By default, they're each as wide as they need to be, which is kind of gross. So that's weird. So what if I said here, actually let me bring this back in. What if I gave them a width of 33%? You seeing this? I get 33, 33, 33. So now I've got all those three in one row, and they're taking up almost a third. But notice it's not exactly a third because what is 33 times 3? 99. That's not 100. So if you wanted to, you could come in here like this, and by putting in enough of these extra decimal points, it will be really close to 100%. Okay, so what I'd like us to do before we end here today is I like this 3-column layout, but once it gets kind of small, I would like them to stack on top of each other. You with me? Like those are at this point or so, definitely this point, they're too small for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a media query. So we're going to say at media, and I don't know, I want to put these parentheses in. I want to say if the width is less than a certain number, maybe it's 600, maybe it's 900 pixels, then I want to have some different CSS. I want to override my other CSS. And there's two things I can do here. Wait, why did red go away? Is it because I'm in the middle of this? Maybe so. I want to say the dot boxes have a width of 100%. Let's see what this does. Does nothing, okay? Because there's not enough room. The other thing I want to do is I want to say the dot wrapper goes from flex direction row, which is the default, to flex direction column. Actually, I'm going to comment this out so we can see what it does. Okay, right there. There's my 600. So when I cross 600, which maybe that's, I don't know, I want to make it 800. So that's 800. I go from 3 columns to 1 column. You seeing that? Because at this breakpoint, once the width becomes less than 800, wrapper, which did have a flex direction of row, becomes flex direction column. You with me? But I can see when I do this, I actually wanted to change in a different way. I want two things to change. I want the width of the boxes to also go to 100%. So at this screen size, when I get less than 800, I want two things to change. I want it to go from a row to a column, and I want all of them to be 100% wide. I think, though, I can probably pull that out. Oh, no, because I needed it to be. Never mind. Actually, no, I bet I can make this 100%. Oh, but put the semicolon. Yeah. So this is probably the better way of doing this if this is the behavior that you want. You see, it still works the same, and I don't actually even need this because If you set things to be 100% in a Flexbox container, 3 100% won't fit, so it squeezes them all down to fit. Does that make sense? So you kind of get that behavior for free due to Flex. Thanks for hanging with me. I'll see you guys on Friday. Maybe let's do a Kahoot over. Let's do a Kahoot on Friday over responsive web design.